Hey everyone, welcome back to the shop. Well, I've been absent for a few months and some things have happened since then. And I just wanted to, first of all, apologize for taking so long to get back to y'all. I have actually been slowly recording here and there when I've had some time. As you may notice in the background, there's been a little bit of progress made. And you'll get to see that here shortly, and I'll go through some of that. But I've also been recording little small snippets throughout these past few months, and I just never quite got around to actually editing them all together into one video and actually starting to post for you all. So before we get to where we're at now, we're going to go back in time to when it was a lot colder and to when I was still in college, because actually unfortunately my time I've not been able to spend quite as much as I wanted, but this was my last semester of college, and between that and getting situated into my full-time job and getting that started these past month or so, it's been a bit of a time suck, but I'm starting to have some time now to really make progress on this. But in my free time over the past few months, I have been poking away at this and make a little progress here and there. And right now we are really, really close to putting this thing on the road and actually seeing how it's going to do driving down the road. So without further ado, let's go back, whichever way is back, in time, about 2 or 3 months ago, to some clips I recorded back, actually it'd be more than 2 months ago, because these first couple clips are from January, and to when it was a little colder, and when I was bundled up a little more, and we'll go see where we were there, and then we'll slowly work forward. I'll probably break this up into maybe 2 or 3 videos, depending on exactly how much I want to cram into each one. So that way you all don't have to sit through an hour-and-a-half long video. But we'll edit all this up, and I'll start posting you, kind of show you as we make some progress, and then we'll bring you back where we're at right now and tell you kind of where we're at and where the immediate plans are. So stay tuned, and let's go back in time. Per usual on this channel, things have taken longer than expected, and to do the old 2-step forward, we take 27 back. Well, that happened. Yeah. So stay tuned. We'll let you know why the head's taking off now. So I'm sure a lot of y'all are now probably wondering, well, Matt, this was a running motor. Why'd you take the head off? What was it? Wasn't it fine? Well, yes and no. We did get it actually running a little longer, and I'll come back to that a little later and elaborate a little more on why the head is exactly off. But first, we'll show you a little bit of a progress update here on some of the rest of the stuff that's happened on the truck since y'all last saw it. I've been doing a couple things since y'all last tuned in. One of the big things was getting the fuel system actually installed. So if you look up under here now, I've actually got a rear tank installed. Pardon the bad lighting up in here. The other thing we did, if you can pan up in here and see, I did a modification to the fuel filler neck that is very, very important on these trucks if you want to be able to use the bigger rig style fuel nozzles. You can take and rip out the baffle that normally would be located up in this filler pipe here, and by removing it and adding a separate tank vent like I have here with the integrated rollover valve, you can eliminate the need for that baffle and allow this to flow a lot more fuel a lot quicker, and make it so that way these do not have the characteristic clicking on and off that these trucks are somewhat known for. In addition to getting that up, also been working up under here, getting all the fuel lines run. We crawl up under here, you can kind of see in the back there, you can maybe see some of the lines. You can kind of tell I don't got a front tank in it right now. I'm still waiting on that to come in. But I have been up here, got the fuel switching valve installed, and the front end, or to the motor, and the rear tank lines installed. The front tank lines are still open at the moment till I get that front tank, but the system is actually operational at the moment, and that's actually how we discovered the problem that I now have. In addition, as you may notice, I have the transfer case mocked up in place, basically purely so I can start measuring front and rear drive shafts and get those coming. I'm not sure in the last video if you all saw this or not, but we've also been doing the transmission mounts and getting those all set up. What you see stacked up on top right there are all of the shims. We're kind of working to level this as best as we can and get it to sit level. And so the shims are all that are in there to try to roughly level out the transmission and get it to where it sits the best for the drive shaft angle. That mount is actually a fabricated mount with an integral crutch slave cylinder, the same one as the factory would have used for ease of parts usage. And then that is actually a Chevy, or a square body Chevy cab mount, and part of the factory transmission cross member that have been joined together in harmony to create the lower mount. And then the same thing was essentially created also on the other side to hold up the passenger side. And both of those were utilizing the factory square body Chevy, drop the light, cab mounts, or excuse me, the factory Eaton Fuller transmission mounts. So the other thing we've got done, if you can see kind of more forward there, have the clutch linkage mocked up. Obviously it's very, very rough at the moment, and I've got to do some more improvements, and you'll see that a little later on in a separate video, getting that all set up. But I have at least it mocked up and getting it going. And 3, 2, 1. All right, so now we get to the gist of, well, Matt, why is the head taken off? Well, getting the fuel lines hooked up and getting the fuel filter and all that actually hooked up correctly and able to pull fuel allowed us to actually run this for a little bit longer and get the engine actually more than just kind of spitting and sputtering, actually able to run for a little bit and rev and start to kind of see how it was going to work. And very quickly after doing all that, we realized a rather significant problem. As I was sitting there revving it and just kind of bumping it off of idle, this is a heater port for the heater core for the HVAC system. And also on the let's see if you can kind of tell. This is the knuckle for the upper thermostat. This pipe here is a bleed pipe for the radiator. This pipe and this elbow here both had a fairly steady stream of gas coming out of them within about a minute or so after fire up. Unfortunately, did a little bit of investigating into what that gas actually was and how it correlated, and it seemed to show that this was in fact emitting exhaust gas, which meant that since this is a coolant passage, somehow combustion gas was getting from the combustion chamber into the coolant passage. And so with that unfortunate diagnosis, the only thing that I could think to do was pull the head. Unfortunately, but another thing that I did that I forgot to mention up underneath here was we put a slight cab lift on it, mostly to give us just extra room for the clutch and the transmission and all that, because it was getting pretty tight under there, and it just gave us a little bit more breathing room. The other benefit of doing this was it gave us some more height so that the head, valve cover, all that could come off without doing anything with the cab. That's one thing I really wanted to try to do, was make it so that way without removing any of these major components, I could service this motor if, you know, ironically enough, if a need became present. And well, it decided that it was in fact present. So we have this pulled apart at the moment to do some investigation, and from what I have found, I have not really found a smoking gun. I went through and got the head all cleaned up. Obviously, as you probably saw, I pulled the injectors out and they're labeled. They appear to be in pretty decent shape other than just a little bit dirty. I think I'm going to clean them up by hand and just kind of see how they clean up, see if they seem like they need to go out and get some work done to them. If necessary, we will send them out and get them rebuilt, but overall they look pretty good, and how the motor was running, I think we'll probably leave them if they clean up okay. As for the head, it also appears that we did pretty good. This had a little bit of carbon deposits on it, as you would expect out of an engine that's been run. But after taking, and I went ahead and cleaned this all up, got all of that carbon off using the official machinist valve grinding and engine surfacing and combination tool to clean this up professionally. Yep, professional cleanup job. We got it all cleaned up and decarboned. The finish actually on a lot of these valves and all that looks very good, and I really don't see any pitting or corrosion or any damage. And also, probably more importantly, looking at some of these areas in here, and specifically kind of up and around here, it's not really wanting to focus the best at the moment, but the main thing I've been looking for is cracks. There is a very, very high prevalence in these types of engines and diesel engines like this. You can get cracks developing kind of in this area here where you have very little head thickness if you're revving the motor a lot or whatnot. And fortunately, as you can see, there is just some surface like coloring and otherwise just some discoloration, but running your nail over it and trying to feel it, there is no visible damage, and more importantly, no cracking. To at least to my eye. I'm sure it would be probably better to take this and actually have it MagnaFlux and really dive into it a little deeper. And if we continue to have a problem, I will probably go to that next level. However, at the moment, what we're trying to do is just kind of triage this, see if there's any smoking gun here, literally and figuratively. Also, because of we had a pretty heavy stream of smoke coming out of here to the point that it was likely that a small little minor crack or defect or something very, very minuscule likely was not our problem because of the rate that it started to smoke out of there. It seemed like whatever it was a much bigger thing, like a head gasket delamination or something, a damaged liner, a severely damaged liner, which is also part of the other thing we're working on here. As you can maybe tell, I went ahead and filled the block up with coolant as best as I can, and albeit this is not as good as a pressure test with a actual having the head on and actually pressurizing the cooling system, but this will generally give you a fairly decent result as to the condition of if you have a pinhole or not, purely just because even a small pinhole will weep a little bit into the cylinder, even just with this amount of static pressure. So, doing some looking here, we've already done all but these middle two cylinders here, and so far the middle two are looking just like the other two, and they look very good. Don't mind that wet spot down in there. That's actually oil that we dripped into this cylinder as we were pulling the head off. A little bit of it dripped in there, so that is not coolant, that is engine oil. And overall, the rest of them have shown exactly like what you're seeing. Very clean, very minimal damage and debris. Actually, if I can get the light to focus on it right here, yeah, you can't really see it. There is a little bit of staining on the cylinder walls, likely just from the fact that this motor did sit for a couple of years before I got to it. Yeah, you can kind of see it in that cylinder too. They have quite a bit of places where there is some light staining. None of it is catchable with your fingernail, which for anybody that doesn't know, that's a pretty good test of thickness. You can catch it with your fingernail, it's at least a couple thousandths. If you can't catch it with your fingernail, it's probably under that. And my general rule of thumb is if it's under it to where I can't catch it with my fingernail, it's probably not an issue. Now, for a lot of things, that really doesn't necessarily apply, but for stuff like this, it's normally a good rule of thumb. But if you can see, this still has cross-hatching in all of these liners, and they look in overall pretty good shape. I also ran a borescope down each one of these holes here. These holes right here are coolant passage holes that actually go right next to the sleeve. These bigger holes here actually go to a passage next to that sleeve pocket area, and you can't see the sleeve in these holes. But in these ones you can. So I ran a little borescope I have that is now wandered off down these holes so you could actually see them. And they don't look the best. They definitely have some pitting and some damage of some kind, likely just from lack of coolant maintenance, but they look like they are still plenty serviceable and nothing to where I would be concerned. So I think at the moment we also triaged the head gasket and could not really find any major smoking gun, but it's also possible that the head gasket just lifted to where it was able to just blow right past it. And the way that this head gasket came off, unfortunately, it did not yield itself to giving a super clear answer. So as much as I don't like to do it, I think we're going to do a little bit more testing just to try to make sure we've beat this horse dead. And then going forward with that, I think we're just going to get a kit for the new head gasket and new seals for this upper end here. Put that in and just see if it continues to have the same problem, because if it fixes it, well then great, we've solved the problem. And if not, then the odds are we really have something a little bit more serious going on with this motor, and the odds are it needs to be in-framed. And that actually brings me to the last thing that we can update y'all on. I really was debating as we started doing the work on this that it would be really nice to be able to in-frame this truck. And for many of these pickups like this, an in-frame rebuild is just not something you can do just because of the nature of the design of the pickup and also the design of the motor. A lot of them aren't really suited for that. Really, you can only in-frame wet and some dry sleeve motors, and typically not in an application like this at all. But seeing as how we have a rather unique setup here, we actually have the potential to in-frame this, and so I made a few other tweaks and changes to this frame setup to actually make that more conducive. As y'all already saw, this engine cross member sits forward of the engine, giving us clearance to the oil pan on that side. The rear sets on pads with nothing to obstruct the oil pan to drop. That's basically the main thing you have to contend with, is you have to be able to get the oil pan off and get all of the rod bolts out. Typically on an in-frame, you will either leave the crank or sometimes you will also drop the crank. So either way, being able to get to all that is important. The one big obstacle is the main cross member right in here. Obviously, that goes right underneath, and that can be a problem. As some of you may remember, I did have to cut it out very, very significantly to give clearance for this motor, but it is something that has to be retained for the front axle to locate it side to side. I came up with a compromise though, and that was the idea of having a dropout cross member. Now the cross member itself has been welded in and is fabbed in, ready to go, and I have to just make a set of plates to connect it to the factory fixed in cross member sections, both on that and on this side. But basically the idea is that there will be a plate that will fit up in here, matching this profile, same on this side, that's welded to this cross member, and then this cross member will bolt up to it with a planned 4 and 4 bolts on each side to give it maximum stability and strength, because it is also going to retain the factory feature of being an axle locating point while still giving the necessary clearance here for the front axle, and a little bit of a clearance notches in a couple places just to give myself some more room. Basically though, what the end of this all turned out is that I have the ability that with a plate there and a plate there, I can in effect unbolt this front cross member here, drop this out, and have full access to my oil pan, and to be able to have plenty of room to drop the oil pan out and get everything I need, because the front axle sits low enough that it is not in the way once this cross member has been taken out of the picture. So it's not something I was originally really planning on doing, but I had to modify and rebuild the front cross member anyway, and I think this is a really, really nice solution to that problem. The other thing is too, it has a lot more room when the correct springs are going to go on. I'm going to mock up the correct plates and get them kind of tacked in place, and then we're actually going to pull the springs out of this, put the correct springs on, and in the process of having that and having it way up in the air, we're going to go in and actually weld those plates in and get that all squared away so then I can put it all up into place. But I wanted to, before I started on getting that actual frame side done, I wanted to get this motor figured out and kind of see where we're at here to kind of see what I needed to start taking more serious action on. So yeah, that's kind of a update of where we're at. It's a little bit long-winded. I apologize for taking a little bit longer than expected. I was really hoping to give a more quicker update, but unfortunately life and other commitments have gotten a little bit more in the way than I would have liked. But we're making steady progress now. We're getting all of this figured out and making it hopefully even better than before. It also gives me a chance to replace some seals in here, like these seals for the tops of the injectors, the bottom of the pin seal here, go through and actually just have a chance to rework some of this stuff. Not that it really would have been a problem, but it actually gives me just even more opportunity now than I would have had before. So we're going to use it to the maximum here. I'm also going to use this time to take the mechanical oil pressure gauge out and actually plumb in the electric one like I originally had intended, since I have right there access. So yeah, probably the next thing you will be seeing is we're going to be hopefully finishing the triage on this motor, figuring out the cross member, figuring out the clutch, also starting to do some plumbing, getting some of the clutch lines and the power brake and power steering lines all run. So those will be the next couple things we'll get going and slowly start working our way closer and closer to getting this on the road. So be sure to stay tuned. Appreciate y'all very much, and please, if you have any comments or questions, drop them down in the old comment box and I'll do my best to answer them. Appreciate y'all very much, and have a good night.